Good afternoon. Before we begin, I would like to take time to acknowledge that we are gathering here today in London, Ontario, on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Ngunnawal, and Attawandaron peoples. Thank you. Welcome to the 2020 James Reaney Memorial Lecture. My name is Carolyn Doyle, and I'm delighted to host this year's program titled Words and Music. I would like to extend a warm wishes this afternoon to you, our audience, joining us from far and wide. Certainly one of the limited advantages of a pandemic. Now in its 11th year, the James Reaney Memorial Lecture celebrates the legacy of Canadian poet and playwright Jamie Reaney, with a talk by a distinguished speaker, or today we have speakers, who are knowledgeable about the life and work of Reaney, as well as the literary and cultural history of the southwestern Ontario region. Previous speakers have included Colleen Thibodeau, Jean Mackay, John Beckwith, David Ferry, Tom Gary, Tom Smart, Tim Inkster, Marian Johnson, and Peter Denny, and last year, of course, Stan Dragland. The Memorial Lecture Series is one way that the Reaney family, Susan's Reaney and James Reaney, celebrate the legacy of their parents. I would encourage you to check out the websites that Susan Reaney helms, ColleenThibodeau.com and JamesReaney.com, respectively. Words Festival is thrilled to have the opportunity to present this year's James Reaney Memorial Lecture entitled Words and Music, which features the words and poetry of James Reaney, set to the beautiful music and musical compositions of Stephen Hollowitz and Oliver Whitehead. And if the title Words and Music sounds familiar, it should. The old Words and Music store was a downtown London, Ontario landmark in the 1960s and 1970s, where Jamie and Colleen bought books, records, concert, theater tickets. Words and Music was for them a cultural outpost for the Reaney family. Now, a little bit about our musical composers featured here today, Stephen Hollowitz and Oliver Whitehead. Stephen Hollowitz is Director of Music at St. James Anglican Church in London, Ontario, and along with Oliver Whitehead, was co-composer for the Antler River Project. Stephen has recorded 2 CDs of original arrangements of traditional hymns and gospel music, as well as music for the Grand Theatre. Stephen can be seen and heard performing with Denise Pelly, Paul Stevenson, and the contemporary folk group Celtic Shift. Oliver Whitehead is an all-round guitarist and composer in London. He has composed for orchestras, choirs, jazz combos, and has received a Juno nomination for Best Jazz Album, as well as the Forest City London Music Award for World Music. His musical collaborations with Stephen Hollowitz and Sonia Gustafson span a period of more than 20 years. Welcome to you both today. Welcome, Oliver.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted and I think I'm displayed. Steve,
Great.
I
And
see you
Stephen
too.
as well.
Thank you, Carolyn.
I would like to begin by asking, what was it about the words that drew you to the work of James Reaney and to this work in particular?
Well, Steve, you go first because you were the one who decided on it.
Yeah, there was a tribute to Jamie at the Wolf some years ago, where there were various snippets of compositions, and I remember excerpts from the John Beckwith operas. It was a fabulous night, and I cannot recall when it was, but it was certainly before these songs were composed. And it, as being sort of a composer at the time, looking for things that were both regional and kind of enigmatic, that would lend itself to both Oliver and I kind of exist both in a classical jazz pop hybrid world, and those poems were miniatures in a sense, and that I think appealed to either my laziness or my lack of confidence with the genre, but the idea of a miniature seemed that it was doable. and yet they were enigmatic enough that they allowed a lot of freedom in musical idea and interpretation. And I think, did I bring them to you, Oliver? I can't remember.
Yeah, you did. And just so everyone is clear, this is what you really hit upon was this short cycle of little miniature poems called Brushstrokes Decorating a Fan, which has a little poem, a miniature poem for every letter of the alphabet. And we're sort of still, we haven't got through the alphabet yet. There may be more to come, but
I think we both had.
But you brought them to me, yeah, and I unearthed some old emails where we kind of sorted out who was going to set which of these poems to music.
Yeah.
There's a bit of back and forth about it.
So so as I mean, I never really knew a lot of Jamie's work till I came to London, but I always knew of him in Thunder Bay because there's a woman up there for a theater company. Susie Turnbull was with Cam Lab Theater, and she had a close association with Jamie. And so she says, "Oh, you're in London. You should check out James Reaney." And the only time it happened is we bumped into Colleen and Jamie at the Grand Theater coming out of Jeff Culbert did a production of One Man Mask there, and we bumped into the two of them, and it was sort of like shaking of hands. And then the next time we saw him was at Mount Hope when he was in the hospital there.
Yeah, this was in the fall of 2007. I went back over the whole timeline of this.
I couldn't remember when it was. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know which month or day, but it was the fall of 2007 when we actually went to see him, and you sort of initiated this, and we went there to kind of get his blessing and ask him what he thought about us setting them to music, and yeah.
Was that before or after the birthday party, Oliver?
That I don't remember. I don't know. I think it was before.
It may have been, because that meeting at Mount Hope was interesting because Jamie seemed most concerned about who is going to be paying for the endeavor and where the granting process was coming from. And he didn't quite believe us when we were reassuring him that we were just doing this for our own amusement and recreation, as it were. But he did request, and I don't remember how it requested, but he wanted music at his birthday party, which ended up being his final birthday. And I remember going to Mount Hope and we played Beatles songs and actually the first of the Brushstrokes, what we presented to him at that.
I think I got that day too. I think it was March 2008 when that happened.
Okay.
But to be honest, I don't quite remember that. It's possible I personally wasn't involved.
I don't think you were in town.
Yeah.
And because we had this.
Well, I do know what happened. Yeah, March 2008. That's when that was the month that my brother passed away in Ireland, and I had to rush over there. That's probably what happened. Yeah.
So I think the beauty of the poems, but also this strong urge to make contact with this great literary figure, and to at least try to do something, maybe more of a contemporary, is that fair, but more of a hybrid musical genre as opposed to it being strictly art song or classical type compositions.
Yeah. Listening to them back, I mean, I'm struck really by how they are mostly in a kind of pop, folk, jazz sort of idiom rather than what people would recognize as art.
Yeah, like
mostly not like that.
Yeah, and especially considering his association with John Beckwith, it really is far removed from the language of John Beckwith. So
I would think so. Yeah.
That's wonderful that you actually met with Jamie and had his blessings, and that he was able to hear a couple of these pieces. That makes it that much more meaningful and poignant, kind of, as we move forward.
Yeah, and I think he was at he was at the concert, wasn't he, when at First St. Andrews, when we actually did the premiere of the first batch of them that we wrote. And that, I've got a date for that as well. I think that was let's see, that was in February of 2008. We did an River show at First St. Andrews.
I remember that. Yeah.
The last day, February 29th, I think. February 15th. Yeah.
I remember Colleen and Jean Mackay being there in the front row. And the challenge I remember from that was she said, "Oh, well, you could never do that with my poems. There's way too many words in my poem."
But we did.
And we showed.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure our audience is eager to hear some of this music now. So why don't we introduce the musicians that you worked with to produce some of this? And we're very excited to have joining us in the musical recordings and also joining us today, flautist Ingrid Crossman, who has performed with many orchestras and ensembles across Canada and has toured China with the Ontario Festival Symphony Orchestra. She's taught flute at the University of Calgary, Mount Royal College, Medicine Hall College, and the Inner London UK Education Authority, and now has works with the London Youth Symphony and has her flute studio with private students in London. Sonia Gustafson is an award-winning jazz songstress with a unique style and polish. Sonia is an accomplished, classically trained soprano and is a popular guest with symphonies, choirs, and big bands alike. She's released 2 CDs which receive regular CBC airplay. This multifaceted performer is an engaging songstress who connects deeply with her audience and shares her love of song with passion. And that's really going to come out today in the recordings of these works. So Stephen, do you want to set up the first set of pieces that we're now going to hear from today from Brushstrokes Decorating a Fan?
Sure. So Oliver and I arrived at some sort of negotiation as how we were going to split them up, and um, it was kind of interesting just to see which ones we each gravitated towards. The In Bed at Night almost seemed to me a prelude, a very kind of inside piece, whereas the other 3 pieces to me are outdoor pieces. This first one was an indoor piece of domesticity, and in fact, we added a previous song, Domicile, before this one in a later version of the set. So almost like a peaceful lullaby or a sort of the coziness of the inside of the home, whereas the other pieces, Sentence of Person actually mentions Huron Street, the locale of Jamie and Colleen, and then sort of very environment things with the wind and the leaves and the orchard. So this to me is the exception of the pieces that I wrote, where it's very tranquil and very serene.
Great. So first up, we'll listen to In Bed at Night. That's so beautiful. Dear good things that wait.
Mhm.
Now, next, we're going to listen to a sentence of persons. Josh is just queuing that up for us now.
A 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. A sentence of persons drifts by on Huron Street now, which started before dawn, ends only at moonrise. With a single last traveler after midnight long.
Beautiful. Next up, we're going to hear The Wind, which is combined with the stanza Leaves Speak. Did you want to say anything about that, Steve? Or
Well,
is that
the one we just heard, it just has sort of that gentle, sort of cool shuffle of being on Huron Street, which is maybe the coolest street in London. I don't know, but it just has that kind of lazy, jazzy feel to represent the outside. The wind has got quite. What I recall about this is a very cool flute part. It was quite deliberately trying to kind of mimic the wind sound. And then leaves, we experimented with some sound effects and sound poetry. So there were definite deliberate musical decisions made based on the texts of these next two.
great and a perfect day for a November afternoon?
The wind plays cards with us today, then flings us down and flies away to comb across the eyes of girls their curls and drown us in our boat. Oh, wind, friend of us not. Leaves speak of summer. Leaves speak of fudge. Leaves speak of winter. Leaves speak of spring.
Song that we're going to hear is the stanza Orchard. Did you have anything that you wanted to add for that one, Stephen?
Sonia is always very exuberant about this one. I think she likes the hoedown country rhythm that's kind of put in here.
Orchard. First a half small red round, and the Ben Davis Scarlet, not write too much. But still even then, but still even then, still even then, aha, Joker, who you married to Mr. Macintosh, who smoothed me to the delicious good land.
That was fun. So all of those compositions were in that set were put together by Stephen Hollowitz. So thank you, Stephen, for each of those.
Thanks, Carolyn. It was really fun to hear the performances back. That's the first time I've heard them, and they sound great. So thanks to all our musical colleagues here. I just got a message from our research department here, Adam. So the birthday party was September 1st, 2007. So I think, Oliver, we must have got the Mount Hope visit must have been before that, because that's when the request for music at Jamie's birthday was. And then we wrote the songs, and then they were premiered that February. So I think that's the chronology. And then
so the birthday party was another thing that I guess
was the second. Yeah, it was the second.
Right.
I think that was after our first visit. So that was from the research department here. So thank you, Carolyn. That was fun to listen
That's
to.
great. Our first set of brush strokes. Interesting to hear how different each one of them is. It's just like a little splash of an idea or a suggestion that comes out from each stanza. Yeah. So our next set of pieces, our next set of stanzas are all compositions by Oliver. And do you have anything you would like to say to set these up, Oliver, or how James's words have inspired or informed?
Well, I guess shall I just say maybe a little bit of introduction to each one separately? Because I think that's how.
Yes, of course.
I think the first one up is Ernie's Barber Salon. And this is really one of my favorites in that whole series. It's this little tribute to Ernie Taylor. And Ernie Taylor was a barber who worked on Huron Street, near where the Reaneys lived. And he was quite a sort of well-known local character. And he went on barbering till he was really quite an elderly guy, at least in his 70s. And I think that's important in the piece. I think probably by the time James Reaney wrote that, he was already, quite a veteran. And I think that's important. So at first blush, the piece is just about Ernie in his barber shop. But Reaney, I think it shows something about Reaney's poetry, which is that he likes to mythologize the everyday, everyday people and places. And so pretty soon after the beginning of the song, in fact, in the very second line, we have Ernie being transformed into something more than just, a person in London, Ontario, because he becomes Mr. Delilah the barber. So, here we have something which is sapping your strength somehow, like, Delilah, Samson. And then, so you think, well, what is this? What's happening next? And then he drops this very heavy metaphor in the next line, which is when he starts talking about him scything, being like somebody scything. And of course, you could think, the cliche is, the Grim Reaper, but I think it's actually time that he's talking about. I think, what he does is he transforms this into a little vignette, a little poem about time. The man with the scythe. And time is just that thing that kind of slowly just keeps everything revolving around. And so time, of course, is a very good subject for music. but the music for me of that piece just came from the feel of, I mean, actually, having said all this interpretation of the poem, the song itself is very short and very simple. And what it is, it just gives a feel. It gives a sort of jazz, relaxed, easy swing. It's basically a kind of blues. And I got that from partly the image of him in his barber shop, which was below street level. So you have to duck down below ground. And so that gave me the feeling of a sort of dive, you know, going down to a dive and going somehow sort of walking out into an earlier time, into some kind of speakeasy or barrel house saloon, you know. And I wanted the music to somehow evoke that. And then also the sort of easy swing of the music is also the swinging of the side. Oh, and James just told me just today or yesterday, he told me something really interesting about Ernie, which was that he actually had a heart condition, and he had this monitor which monitored the beating of his heart, and so that just feeds in perfectly to this idea of the ticking of time, and the rhythm of the sides and the rhythm of the music. So, having said all that, you know, I've probably taken about 2 or 3 times as long as the song itself. But let's listen to it.
Let's listen to it. Can you hear what they're saying? I love that. Cuts a field of hair. And it does have that speakeasy kind of feel to it. Yeah. And the place itself it looks like a speakeasy when you drive by and still see it from the outside. It's lovely.
Yeah, it's like a vision. You can imagine the old guys back in the day sitting there smoking their cigars and chewing the fat, you know.
I remember going in there actually with my dad. Going there on a Saturday afternoon. Yeah. Getting popped from the machine, yeah.
It's been around for a long
time. Do you want to set up Dark of the Moon for us?
Yeah, Dark of the Moon. That's another little piece of whimsy, I guess. It's I think it brings out the sense of almost kind of childlike wonder in some of, you know, James Reaney's poems. It's just this idea that, you know, there is a time in every monthly cycle of the moon where it's actually completely obscured, so you can't see it. Well, or maybe not every month. I don't know. Is it every month, or is this an eclipse of the moon he's talking about? Not sure. But anyway, on this particular night, there is no moon, and so, you know, the moon is obviously a big symbol in poetry. It's always a symbol of mystery, but it's doubly mysterious when it's not there. And so the poem is just this playful kind of meditation on the night sky without the moon in it. So I don't think I have to say much more. I mean, musically, it's a nocturne. It's a nocturne. It's got very quiet. It's just voice and guitar, so very quiet, and the guitar part is kind of low in the register, and it's all kind of subdued, and hopefully gives you a bit of that sense of the mystery of the dark.
Good. We're going to listen next to Dark of the Moon.
Dark of the moon, moon, where are you in the heavens this dark starry night? Shall I find you by missing some stars, blotted out by the veiled face of a nun, dimly traced out by earthlight? When at tomorrow's eventide I see your bright sickle, shall I still wonder who the night before smuggled you unseen across the sky?
So hauntingly beautiful. Just lovely.
Well, it comes from the poem, and like many of his other poems, it's just right there on the page. It's a song lyric. It just begs to be set to music. It's even got its musical rhythm to it.
Our next two have some similarities, and I know a book and I know an experience. And do you want to talk about those for a minute now, Oliver?
Yeah, similar titles. I think the subjects are a little different. But I know a book is again sort of a playful little whimsical image. It's just takes the idea of a person reading a book and then turns it upside down. It's in this little poem. It's the book that reads the person. So I think he's sort of trying to say that books can tell us something about ourselves, like a mirror that we find out about ourselves, and maybe they know more about us than we do. So they read us, and then it ends with this funny line. They can see nobody coming up the road, and that's very enigmatic. It's nobody uppercase, so it's not just they can't see anybody. It's they can see nobody, who is some kind of an entity, some person. So who is this nobody? Is it an imaginary character that you see in a book, or is it just I'll leave that to each reader to think about. And then as far as the music goes, the text, the other sort of main thing about the poem is that there's a lot about space in it. They can see farther up than up, they can see farther down than down. So it sort of covers the whole field of vision, range. And so I kind of took that rather literally, and you'll hear the vocal line rising on the up and falling down on the down. Yeah, that's it. I know a book. And maybe I can then introduce the other one too. Shall I talk about I Know an Experience? The second one, I Know an Experience, is about it's about a very long-term relationship between two people. Obviously, James and his wife Colleen, and the kind of way in which they become intertwined and almost interchanged as people. And so it's a poem that seems to me to fall into two parts. That it begins with this image, this metaphor on the page of being like a butterfly's wings that open and close, and you don't quite know what he's getting at there. It's just a symbol on the page, but I found that intriguing musically. And actually, if you look at the musical score, I tried to write it so the notes on the page were actually sort of arranged in a way that sketched out a shape of wings. So, the voice part and the piano part are sort of inversions of each other. Well, I guess you have to see it. But then it kind of switches, and suddenly he starts to talk about time over the years. Ourselves have been blended, and then so we're into a narrative idea, and so at that point, musically, I kind of completely switch it into almost like a new song. That's where the guitar comes in, and it becomes almost like a sort of ballad, a sort of folk ballad about how things have changed over time. And they're sort of involved in these cycles of interaction and separation and blending again. So yeah, so let's listen to these two then. First of all, I know a book, and then I know an experience.
Good. First up, we'll listen to I Know a Book. And we'll all have a chance to kind of contemplate who is nobody.
Yes.
I know a book that opens the people and reads them, spreads them out pleat by pleat till they see as far up as up, till they see farther, far than down. It makes so sharp their eyes that east or west they can spot nobody. Coming up the road, I know a book that opens the people and reads them, spreads them out pleat by pleat till they see as far up as up, till they see farther, far than down. It makes so sharp their eyes that east or west they can spot nobody. Coming up the road.
That's so lovely. While Josh is queuing up, I know an experience. I have to say that's as a librarian, that's one of my very favorite of all of these.
Of course, it's the anthem.
Stanzas. And
the
I
anthem
love
of
that.
all libraries.
I love that phrase in it as it opens up pleat by pleat. It kind of again kind of refers back to that brush strokes decorating a fan, and in that oriental fan that pleats open and shut and reveals different images. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, and that pleating comes into the next one too.
Yes.
I pleating and unpleating. Yeah.
Yes, that's why I had said there was some similarity to
yes,
the
you're quite right.
pleating.
Yes. Well spotted.
I know an experience that brings my two butterfly wings tied together, then open, now shut. Bleu, sudden bright. Over the years, ourselves have been blended. Ourselves have been blended by all this together. Pleated and unpleating, opening and closing, tight together, loose apart.
So another musical thing there was I deliberately, I know Sonia has breath that goes on forever, so I put a lot of whole notes all tied together so she could
Maybe she'll
make
have
her
a
breath.
chance to talk about that in just a couple of minutes. We just have one more piece left, one more stanza left from Brushstrokes Decorating a Fan. And I think that it's the final stanza from the poem. So it'll be the 26th stanza, Up a Walk. And I think that that was a piece that you and Stephen collaborated on together.
Yeah, well, sort of. We kind of, well, Steve, why don't you tell the story of it?
I think we both inadvertently said it. We each thought we were doing that poem.
That's right.
And they seem to fit together really well. I always saw mine as sort of a companion piece to the first one, the In Bed at Night. Whereas, as I said, that was to me an interior and inside piece. I saw this stanza as coming back in from the outside world back into the home. And there's a certain sacrificial element in the text. I mean, with the idea of the wood or the twig or whatever being offered into the stove and ascending into heaven. So to me, it was always reflective, but joyful in a way, in sort of an inevitable way. And then Oliver's, I think, whereas mine is maybe a little pensive, I think Oliver's is definitely very joyful. So the two of them really did dovetail nicely together when we eventually put them side by side.
Yeah, I think one of us had to change the key, but
yeah.
I don't recall who, but anyway, I think it was an E flat in the end.
Yeah.
Well, that's true collaboration then. So next we'll listen to Up a Walk. So we're going to be capturing all from In Bed at Night was stanza A, and this is stanza Z. So A to Z, Up a Walk.
Up a walk into a house I ran. They put me in the stove. Out its chimney smoke I rose. I rose into heaven's Up a walk into a house I ran. Into a house I ran. They put me in the stove. Out its chimney smoke I rose into heaven's love.
Amazing. I wonder if now we can bring in Sonia and Ingrid.
Just for a second, Carolyn, our research department is right on this broadcast. But his theory is that Up a Walk is about a newspaper, which is kind of a cool image. And
that is a cool image.
Kind of fits.
Whose theory?
Adam's theory is it's a.
Yeah. Well, it always did strike me as like Up a Walk into a house I went. They put me in a stove. What am I? It's kind of phrased like one of those riddles.
Riddle.
Newspaper could be it. Yeah.
Tribute to younger James's career,
Yeah, the free press.
So what wonderful music it must be to perform. I wanted to maybe turn it first to Ingrid. The flute sections are just absolutely stunning. I wondered if you wanted to talk for a minute about what it's like performing these pieces.
It's been great, to tell you the truth. It's I came in on a little bit later in the collaborations. I just last year around this time, I guess Oliver had asked me if I would work on these pieces with them for a performance we did in January. And it was just, as a classically trained flute player, it was so nice and refreshing to do something a little bit out of my what I would normally do. And I just loved the way the flute interacted with the words and sort of was the musical equivalent of what the words were depicting, or what Sonia would be singing, and I would sort of comment on that. Or if it was a butterfly, then maybe my part would sound like a butterfly. Or in the wind, your wind, you can hear it weaving in and out of the vocal line or the poetry. So that's been quite... it's just been a wonderful experience for me, and working with these 3 other people has just been fantastic.
Well, the playing was great too.
Thanks.
It just brings a whole other dimension to the music and to the expression of the words. It's really incredible, Ingrid. Yeah.
Yes, and thank you. And also just the characters, like going from one, like I just felt the music really brought out the different moods and expression, or the intention of the poetry, and that was really nice.
Thank you. Now, Sonia, oh my gosh, you do have notes that go on and on in these pieces, and I get the impression that some of those notes were written for you.
Yeah, when the guys told me about the idea for these songs, I was really excited because I have a music degree from Western in classical music, so singing a lot of art song, which is a lot of poetry set to music, often in another language. So you're doing the research and figuring out what this poem means, but also what each and every word means. And on the flip side of that, I'm singing jazz gigs with Oliver and Steve, where it's very casual and very, very direct. Like, you deliver it to your audience and they understand it. They don't need a translation. And so I found these songs really exciting because they were, first of all, in English, so you could really understand it, but like the riddle sort of quality to them. And every time I sang them, I sort of discover something new about them. I always loved that, or found a different angle or way of looking at it and understanding it. But also that they're about these local places, like that barbershop. I've never been in there, but I've passed it a million times. And I love it. It's like I've met all of these people that have contributed to making these songs. But they were so much fun to deliver because I found that the music that Stephen and Oliver both wrote really embodied the words and delivered them in a perfect way. So I really enjoyed working on it. Every time we revisit, I'm saying, we got to do this again. Okay, when's our next? When are we going to do these again?
And there may be more next time.
I remember when you were recording that day at Aeolian Hall, and there were 2 pieces that weren't included, and you said, "I love this music so much. Can we please do another 2? Because I don't want to go home without doing more of this." So you can really tell that you really embody the passion of the words and really deliver that to the audience.
Yeah, well, and I love the miniature idea of it too. Like, there's really very little repeated text and rhyming. There's these little vignettes, right? And you're trying to figure out and pull the meaning out of it. And some of them are, sort of a little bit of a mystery. I don't know. I really enjoy that. It's very different from the other types of poetry I'm used to singing, where sometimes a lot of it can be very similar, writing about love or about, the trees and the wind. And this one, like, you really hear them. They're quite unique.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Well, and we're going to hear your songs take on a little different persona in the next set, moving away from James Reaney. But I wanted to give you a chance to talk about Brushstrokes Decorating a Fan before we went to that place. So thank you. We have a really special treat, a special addition to this year's James Reaney Memorial Lecture, in that we're going to close our program this afternoon with two poems of Colleen Thibodeau, Jamie's wife and partner of 56 years, and always named and by James Stuart Reaney as London's finest poet, one to which many I know agree. So I wonder if we can, if Stephen and Oliver, if we can have you say a few opening comments about working now with Colleen's work.
Well, my memory of running into Colleen at Oxford Bookshop when it was on Richmond, and she was purchasing a book that mentioned something about their time in Winnipeg, and I was introduced to her by Hillary, who was running the store, and we talked for about an hour about this entry in this book about Jamie and Colleen's life in Winnipeg. And she knew about the brushstroke songs at the time. It was after we had done the brushstrokes. And I said to her, well, we should be setting your poems. And that's when she made the line that there are far too many words in her poems that they could never be set to music. And I said we were up for the challenge. And Oliver and I were in the group, the Antler River Project at the time. And so it was one of those back burner projects. And when Colleen passed away, our son Adam met with James Jr. and Susan Reaney, and started going through some of the letters and some of the other poetry. And the idea was to use some of the poems from that collection, the Artemis. Do you remember? I don't forget.
Artemisia book, yeah.
The pinkish book. Carolyn will hold up right here, that book. And so it was quite deliberate that they went through the book along with the letters that James and Susan gave Adam access to, and he put together the show. And my recollection was that it was sort of, I came to Oliver and said, well, which ones do you want to do? And which ones am I going to do? I think, does that sort of seem right, Oliver? That's my memory of it.
Yeah, pretty much. Because I mean, obviously it was Adam's show, and I think you were the kind of driving force. And I'm glad you brought me in. And I was really glad to be able to pick a few and work on them, because they were different, very different from James's poetry. They're sort of harder to crack. They're slightly more opaque in a way.
And less of that song style. You know how you mentioned earlier that the brushstrokes just naturally felt like song lyrics.
Yeah.
These felt to me much more narrative, and that posed a real challenge. And a lot of it is quite narrative, but you still wanted to make it a musical experience. And I think having both Oliver and I on the project was great, because you had different musical languages and different approaches as to try to solve this puzzle of depicting a narrative in a very musical style without being cheesy or didactic. Those were sort of the two things you didn't want to be.
Yeah, I thought that there was a great deal of variety among those poems too by Colleen. I mean, they seemed, her voice is not quite so definitive or identifiable as James Reaney's voice. It seems to kind of change and shift.
So the first one that we're going to listen to today is Watermelon Summer. Which of you would like to set up that?
Well, that's Steve.
Steve?
So this is the young girl coming of age to young womanhood. So I feel more like the boys who are stealing the watermelons than the actors on this one. It's a great story. And as I remember, as I was writing, you kind of had these two planes of reality happening, sort of the more emotional, physical side of maturation. And then you had this kind of story about growing watermelons in the patch, and you could kind of take it on both levels. So it has that easy jazzy thing that maybe we default to sometimes when we're doing that. But it's my sense is it's a little more sophisticated note-wise, just the relationship of music to text was much more challenging to make it come off right. And I hope it tells the story. I think it does. I know Sonia always has a good time singing it when she does it. But it was very much, it was harder work for sure than doing poems.
Great.
I think it's just a tiny little miniature piece of musical theater in itself.
Yeah, that's actually a great way of describing it. Yeah, it's a little musical vignette.
Yeah.
Musical vignette. So we're going to listen to that next. Watermelon Summer. It's a lovely story.
Gonna be one hot summer for sure, said Uncle Willie, who had set his heart on growing watermelons in a cindery patch at the very end of his garden. No one is gonna look there for them, he told no one but us, planted them at night. Joyce and I biked sweatily out to our first job. Tenderly moved translucent baby cabbages, made little hats for them, carried water endlessly and longed for the promised crisp light. The pink juices reviving, turning us into real people. He said, we were just at that turning point, 13 years old. We dreamed of the watermelon promise. He said they were coming along nicely, green, taut, bulging over the hillside, as yet undiscovered by the boys. September came, the boys came. One Saturday morning we saw yellowing leaves only, and every watermelon gone. Yet the anticipation of the melon miracle seemed to have turned us, Joyce and I, into real people. As we pondered this, purposely noisy with our milkshakes, solacing ourselves with second best.
That is such a great adolescent story. It's wonderful coming of age. And our last one is Lullaby of the Child for the Mother. Oliver, do you want to say a few words about this?
Yes. It's hard to follow up on that great story. And also, this is kind of more subdued and melancholy, but this is, I think, actually, this is the one I picked out right away. I said, Steve, I really want to do this poem. It's a very short one, and it's a very sad one. I mean, I think a lot of people know that it's sort of based on a family tragedy with Reaney, the loss of a child. And what Colleen has done in it is she's taken the idea of a lullaby and kind of turned it around so that you have the mother um, consoling herself on the loss of a child by invoking the voice of that baby, of that little child. And then the child becomes the singer of the lullaby to console and to comfort the mother. It's a very moving and very poignant piece. And musically, again, to me, it just sort of came off the page. It had a, very much, I obviously wanted to give it a sort of lullaby, rocking feel, that sort of that triple time lullabies seem to have. And then just a sort of air of slight mystery. Some of the imagery in it manages to be somehow slightly surreal. I think I'll just leave the introduction of that.
Great, thank you. So next up, we'll listen to Lullaby of the Child for the Mother.
The child that never lived is the real child whose lovely eyes were seas and little lips were lullabies and lovely seas. He said, my mother is a street where strangers pass. Her hair winds like the wind round wooden poles. Her lovely eyes are seas, her hair's windlet shakes the elder trees. He said, my mother is a stone strangers pass, and when night rocks me round, then I am sure her hair is like the elder tree. Her eyes are
Again, it was just so beautiful. I've been told that we have several questions that have come in, so I'd like to maybe move to that part of the program. But before we do that, I just want to mention that both of these are from these books. Brushstrokes Decorating a Fan is from James Reaney, So West to Home, published in 2005 by Brick Books. And Colleen's poems you can find in the Artemisia book, also published by Brick Books. So I hope that you'll check those out as well. So, the questions. I'm interested to know if the text was altered at all for these pieces.
Not that I recall, no.
All we did was some of them, because they're so short. I, at least in I Know a Book, I just repeated it. And yeah, I think that's it. And then, of course, Up a Walk, we also repeated that. But we didn't alter it. No, not one bit. Good question, though.
It is a very good question, yes, because they read so beautifully.
Yeah.
A lot of really positive comments on your beautiful collaboration to have the gift of words and music.
I'm seeing these comments. Unfortunately, I'm sitting at some distance from my screen. I'd love to read all these comments that are coming in, but
Yes, and
they seem to be good ones.
Yes.
I don't think we're getting trolled or anything, so that's good.
I just wanted to throw in the aspect of, for both Ingrid and Sonia, what a pleasure it was to have you both in that performance for this recording, because you really do need to travel both sides of the musical coin, as it were. And our original performers, Donna Crichton premiered the Colleen songs, and Fiona Wilkinson was the original flute player, and all four of you just have that ability to be on both sides of the street, as it were, because they're not exclusively classical pieces, but you need that ability to pull off some recitative and play some fairly technical things. So thank you to you both. I'm just so blown away by the performances today and hearing them. So it was a real pleasure to have Sonia and Ingrid along. And of course, Oliver, you're always your charming and fantastic self.
Let me second what Steve said. And by the way, because Caroline, I think you mentioned something when you were introducing Sonia just back then. It should be said that we wrote these songs for Sonia. I mean, Sonia helped us create these songs. I mean, she
So in a sense, she's a partial collaborator as well, eh?
Oh yeah,
you're a great collective.
Well, and you were the premier presenter, Carolyn, because they were first done at Landon Library.
Yeah, for a Landon Cabaret evening that we hosted them there. Yes, yeah, and I believe that Ernie was there that night.
I don't think so. I think James. I asked James about that. He said a friend of Ernie, or somebody who knew Ernie, or maybe some distant relative or something. Yeah. But I think Ernie was already pretty elderly by that time. I had thought he was there, but I don't know. We'll have to confirm this from James. Yeah.
Great.
Can I just say something about Colleen's poetry?
Yes, sure.
I love how different the styles are, and to me that's her songs are their theater, right? It's a character and divulging their innermost thoughts to you. There's something that's extremely personal about them, and the more you sing them and you say the words, you start to feel like that person. You get a picture of what they look like and how old they are, and you sort of feel yourself becoming that person a little bit. I was really crushed because when you guys first were developing that show and Adam called me and asked me he told me what Colleen was going to be about, and I saw a couple of the poems and I had to decline. It was the hardest thing I had to do because I knew it was going to be amazing, but I was pregnant with twins and was feeling pretty sick. And especially when I saw how many words there were, I thought there's no way that I'm going to be able to synthesize all of that, because we had a relatively short period of time to put it all together. And I was like, wow, there are a ton of words, right? It's so many. It's like it's a story. There's stories. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do justice to that. Also, that it was going to give me, night terrors, like worrying about ruining it. So I'm so glad that I did in the end get a chance to visit these songs, because
the volume of text is really interesting because it is constant and it's constantly evolving text.
Yeah.
And that show was interesting because the way Adam put it together, some of the songs had speaking. See, it was a theatrical stage piece with two singers and two speaking performers, and some of them had some of the numbers had interaction, alternation between the songs and speaking,
Yeah.
alternating.
And some of the letters,
That was interesting.
personal letters that
Yeah.
Susan Reaney and James had given him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was kind
We
of
have another question that's come in here
Yeah.
from someone who's asked, as someone who writes non-rhyming poetry, I'm interested in how different it is writing music for and performing songs without rhyme.
That's a terrific question.
Yeah.
You want to try it first?
what I just think of is Leonard Cohen always talked about the tyranny of the rhyme, right? In his lyrics and poetry. I think Sonia alluded to it earlier that it tends to be the through composed style. Like you tend to look for a structure, but it's definitely not a pop song or even a strophic structure. I mean, you're continually evolving, and you try to tie it together with motives and rhythms and language, but through composed. I mean, that's to me what the tree demands.
Yeah. It's like the meaning, right? Like every word, every sentence has its own meaning, and you wouldn't say it twice, right? Like you wouldn't repeat a thought just for the sake of hearing it again. It's very different. It's more like opera to me.
That's a good analogy. Unlike Handel and Mozart, where you hear the same words over and over again a lot of times. But yeah, that's the challenge of lacking that sort of lyrical form in the poetry. They're not metrical in that way. So
yeah, I was going to say, I think it's rhyme. I think what sorry, I don't know your name who asked the question, but I think what you probably were getting at was not just rhyme, but meter, a metrical structure, because that's really the more crucial thing. If you don't have a repeating structure of meter in the poem, it's a very different kind of, a very different animal as far as setting it to music. But you don't need meter or rhyme to set something to music, because you don't need meter or rhyme in the words, because there's still meter in the music. You can still have a regular repeating musical rhythm, and you can kind of just play with the words and warp them, and possibly do a little word repetition and word painting and all that sort of stuff. And you can use words can become a very plastic material that you can make them fit into a rhythmic musical form, which is regular and repeats if you want to. Or you can go, as Steve says, you can go the route of making it through composed, meaning that there's no repetition necessarily of melodic form. I mean, it's just every line goes in a different place. So it's in a way it's sort of more creative and more inventive, maybe, I think.
Yeah, in the water, I know there were specific similarities between stanzas, and you could hear that musically, but then there are those passages of almost recitative-like stuff, and that just didn't fit any kind of metrical format. But the inflection, the power of musical inflection, like whether the note goes up or down or a long beat, like just those subtle musical things can really inform how you can set the text without meter or rhyme.
Yeah, and then some text has its kind of its own interior rhythms, whether it's actually written to a specific form or not. And sounds, very musical sounds. There are other elements of the word which are highly musical, and which you can use. You can make those work for you. Setting music. Yeah.
Can I say one other thing, just as a performer, the difference between singing things like James and Colleen's stuff is that you know, when you really like a piece of music and you'll get an earworm, right? And like the melody or like a little part of a phrase will like play over and over and over again in your head. And I find with these, I mean, I get that with the music, but I also get that just with the text. I find myself like repeating the text in my head because just the way they've written it out and the different, you know, the vocabulary and just the turns of phrase are they're so unique and they stick with me and they kind of haunt you in a but in a really good way. And to me, that's the sign of some great poetry that like that really reaches you, you know.
Yeah. Any other questions up there, Carolyn?
One more question that we have. Like, what do you feel is the Southwest influence that come through James Reaney's work and into your music? Is that something that you were aware of and in working with his pieces for the composition?
Well, we certainly see it a lot in the words, in the text. They're full of references to this Southwest Ontario, all through and through, and Colleen as well. All these reminiscences of childhood.
I find this just, there's something you can identify with or feel, and to me it's a little intangible, but it's so cool writing about where you're living, as opposed to so much of the music that you hear or is about places other than that. And I didn't grow up here. I mean, I'm from Thunder Bay, but there's a connection that I think to me is intangible, that you're actually contributing to what the force of art in this area, and you just plug into that. You know, the Shaw's life force. You know, you're plugging into that in your locale, as to worrying being about Toronto or America, or even having a global message. I think there's a place for that localized message.
Well, it's the familiarity, right, of the place, and that, you know, the words that are, you know, like Ernie's and on Huron Street, like they're all places we know, or, you know, we could potentially know. And so there is that sense of place. And because we live here, that place is very strong to us. Whereas the others are more like their dreams, almost like if they talk about Europe or Toronto, like we've been there, but we haven't lived that life. And where, I don't know, it's different, right? It's just what you were saying, Steve. Exactly. I feel that.
Well, everybody writes about Paris and all these other towns, but it's like it's so cool to hear about the other London, right? London, Ontario.
Yeah. Well,
exactly.
I mean, I think that's right. This is what I think. It's very important. This has to be said, that the creation of art within a place, which arises from that place and is about that place, makes that place important. You know, I don't want to try to be grandiose about it, but I mean, it just, they talk about a storied place because it has stories about it. I mean, London, England, it's absolutely brimful of stories and literature and Dickens and everything else. And I think it's art about a place that adds density, that adds richness to that place. So hopefully we've been trying to sort of help to build that.
And I always apologize that time in London, late 60s, early 70s, of Greg Curneau and the Nihilist Spasm Band. And of course, James was very active at that time. And I kind of I wish I had been part of that, because it was such a vibrant art scene. And I think, I don't know, maybe in our own little way, it's just contributing to that, the continuation of that artistic spirit in London, Ontario.
Well, that seems like a really perfect place to kind of wrap up for our discussion for this afternoon. And with this note that each of you brought art into our each individual homes this afternoon. And that's also a beautiful thing, a little bit of London, Ontario going out across the city and beyond. So I'd like to thank you, Stephen and Oliver, Sonia, Ingrid, for such a fabulous musical production. It's been an incredible afternoon.
Well, thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
I also
Thanks to Josh.
want to give acknowledgement to Brick Books, who published these works to the Aeolian Hall, where we did the recordings for these performances just a few weeks ago with their team. To Greg D'Souza, who's done so much of the work in putting it together on this and to all of the Words Festival team and sponsors. It's been a real privilege to be a part of this. So thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day, everyone.
Thanks.
You too.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.